Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Robyn Vincent. Last week, Detroit's City Clerk Janice Winfrey told us less than 5 polling places in the city have accessibility problems. She said her legal obligation includes making sure entrances and voting machines are accessible. Disability advocates say that's not just wrong, it's dangerously misleading. Detroit Disability Power's latest audit found barriers at the vast majority of Detroit's polling sites, 152 of 167 locations. And they say the law demands much more than the clerk acknowledged. Eric Welsby is the advocacy director for Detroit Disability Power, and he's here to respond point by point and to lay out what can still be fixed before voters head to the polls in November. Eric, welcome back to the Metro.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be back.
And I want to note, the Metro contacted Clerk Winfrey's office for comment. We have yet to hear back. So, Eric, you heard Clerk Janice Winfrey's interview with us last week here on the Metro, and that spurred you to issue a press release refuting many of her claims. What, in your view, did she get most wrong?
So I kind of want to take a high-level look at it to start. Is there really is a fundamental misunderstanding of disability in society, right? And clerks aren't exempt from that. And that really leads to a situation where people don't always recognize that there's access issues. They don't always acknowledge them. And certainly no one wants to be on the side of not doing what they're supposed to be doing and not being supportive of the disability community. So I get all that. And you know, well, we responded to a particular interview with the Detroit City Clerk. Like, other clerks have some issues as well. So this isn't, you know, this is a systemic problem and that's what we're really trying to address here, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I want to stay on that notion for a moment, because what you're saying is that a lot of people are moving through this life, through this world, and they're not looking at that doorway and saying, that might be really hard for someone who's using a wheelchair to enter. They're not saying, that uneven sidewalk for someone who can't see very well could be a real problem for them. This is a much broader issue.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of disability and understanding it is experiential, right? And people that live with disabilities, and whether that's a mobility disability that might result in them, being a wheelchair user or using a cane or a walker, if you're blind and you're using a white cane, if you're deaf, right? I mean, all these different disabilities really have different experiences and different needs. And it can be really hard to understand and wrap your head around that and even try to see the world through those perspectives if that's not your experience, or if you're not, if maybe your loved one has that, you're getting some of that knowledge, but it can be really, really hard. And so when people that maybe don't have that experience go through life not acknowledging it, like that's not necessarily that they've done something wrong, but it's not part of their experience. And so it's not on their mind. And so part of what we do in all of our work is really try to help people get that perspective and be thinking about how, in the things that they can control, can they make them so that anybody in our community, any Detroiter with a disability, can get into those spaces, can be involved in our community, can, come to that public meeting, come to that community event, and be a part of it and not feel like they're on the sidelines because they couldn't get through the door or there wasn't adequate parking, so they couldn't park and get out of their vehicle. Right? All of these different things that stop disabled people from even getting into the room, or in the case of what we're talking about here, into their voting booth to cast their ballot.
In other words, this is not a foregone conclusion. There are many things, many fixes that can be made, whether we're talking about polling locations or businesses. And we're going to get into some of the ways that the clerk and other clerks could make simple fixes to make these polling locations more accessible. But first, let's look at the persistent problems here. So Clerk Winfrey told our listeners Detroit has, quote, less than 5 inaccessible polling locations. What does your 2024 audit actually show?
So when we went in, we went to all the sites, and basically what we found was 152 of those locations had at least one barrier. Some of them had multiple, and those barriers include, not appropriate accessible parking, parking lots that you could not travel across safely, getting onto the sidewalk, curb cuts, not being there, or sometimes Michigan winter is tough on parking lots and sidewalks. They've heaved and now there's a an inch lip to get up onto the curb cut, making it really hard for some people to even get up there. Doorways with issues. That they're not wide enough. They don't have, they're super heavy and don't have like an automatic push buttons that don't work. Then once you get into that building, we're looking at the pathways to get to wherever the actual voting space is. Can someone get through those? And then finally in that voting place, there's the voter assist terminal, also known as the VAT, which is there to assist people. Anyone can use it. It's really, really cool. But it'll read the ballot to you. It's touch screen. It has a controller. You can change the contrast, the font size, all these different things to help people with various disabilities successfully cast their own ballot. And then also they're required to have a wheelchair height accessible voting booth. And so it's a whole spectrum of things.
Yeah.
And certainly that VAT and that accessible voting booth are very much in the clerk's control, right? The clerk trains on those, sets those up. And honestly, in Detroit, we've seen improvement since we started doing this. More VATs are set up properly. They're ready to go. They're positioned to protect secrecy. It's not perfect, but we have seen improvement. Some of these things aren't necessarily fully in the clerk's control. Like the clerk probably doesn't have a jackhammer and go fix parking lots.
Right.
So some of these things are going to require bigger solutions. It might require some coordination between citizen advocates, groups like ours, the clerk, to talk with DPW, to talk with the city council, right, to get some of these things fixed. Or even some of our polling places aren't in public buildings.
Right.
They're in churches, they're in schools, which is an entirely different government unit. So talking with the right people to see how we can get these things fixed, but it's a process.
So Eric, what I'm hearing from you is that engagement is really vital to making change here. Engagement between election clerks and people in the disability community. How would you rate the level of engagement thus far, not only with Detroit and its election officials, but with other Metro Detroit areas?
It runs a whole spectrum. I have some clerks that we've sent data to, offered to talk with, that I've heard nothing from. There are some that have gone out of their way to ask some very specific questions and follow up so that they can make improvements and everything in between. And I think that depends a little bit on where that community's at and that clerk and that community's understanding of disability and prioritization of it. But also different clerks have different levels of staffing. Our smaller communities, sometimes it's a clerk and a deputy clerk trying to do the entire job of the clerk, which is elections, and a bunch of other things. And there's other places where there's an entire staff dedicated to elections in our bigger cities, like Detroit, where we have a Department of Elections and people. So staffing, I think, can have an impact on that as well. Some I think it's just not a priority because clerks have a big job. They have a lot of priorities, and sometimes things, don't get prioritized the way perhaps some of us would like to see that done. But in this case, when we're talking about compliance with the law.
And you have touched on this. I want you to distill for us what full compliance means under the law, as briefly as you can.
So all those things I listed before, the parking, pathways, sidewalks, doors, right? All of those things, there's actually guidance that exists both from the U.S. Department of Justice as well as the Michigan Secretary of State and the Bureau of Elections. There's several laws that lay it out. But basically, everything I just mentioned is covered in various laws. And to be fully accessible, you have to check all the boxes in all of those areas.
And your audit covered 167 Detroit polling locations. How many met that full compliance?
15.
15, 1-5. Okay.
Yes. I would note that there were a lot of sites that had an issue in one area, And if that one area was fixed, that number would immediately jump up to 62 sites.
Have you spoken to folks who have tried to vote and found it to be too daunting because of all of these barriers, folks within the disability community?
Yeah, we some stories we get directly, some we get through partners that also do voter protection work. But last year we had a report of someone who could not get into their polling location because there was no accessible entrance, who basically had to get out of their wheelchair and crawl up steps.
Oh my gosh.
We had another person that it took them over 3 hours to vote when they arrived. And this is a polling place they vote at regularly. When they arrived, the VAT was not set up. They always use the VAT. Everybody at the polling place knows this person comes and uses the VAT, but the VAT was not set up. They had to set it up. Once it was set up, it wasn't working right. It wasn't communicating with the printer right. So more delays. They couldn't get it fixed. They were on call with the Department of Elections trying to get it working while this voter waited. Finally, they issued this voter a paper ballot, which they then spoiled, which is why they use the VAT, is because they have difficulty filling out a paper ballot. I think they spoiled at least 2 ballots before ultimately being able to successfully vote. But that was a 3-hour journey for them. That is super concerning, that equipment that's legally required to be set up and ready to go wasn't. I mean, they should be set up in every location, but this is the location where the poll workers know that this person comes and uses the VAT, and it was not set up. And that's hugely concerning.
If the clerk's office called you today, what's the 30-day action plan you'd propose?
I mean, honestly, it would be, let's talk about the things that are fixable between now and November, which a lot of those are the VAT, the wheelchair height voting booth, and, making sure that like internal pathways are clear of barriers, things like that, making sure that, push buttons on doors work, that if a door is heavy and doesn't have a push button, what is the plan to have it be open and open in a way where whatever's propping open isn't blocking the door? Like things like that are super fixable and honestly have minimal to no cost. A lot of that I think can be done relatively quickly. And I will say, we were in all the polling places last week. We just revisited them, and I can tell you more than 5 sites were not in compliance again. And some of the problems were problems we saw before, some are new, but these problems persist, and our real question is how can we fix them? Our goal is to turn around that data we just collected by early next month and get it to the clerk, so the clerk has approximately 2 months to hopefully make some improvements prior to November election, recognizing if we can fix as much as we can now and then fix more between now and next August and November, when we have a statewide election, turnout's going to be up higher. There's going to be a lot more pressure on the clerk's office. The more that can be fixed this year and early next year, the smoother things will go in August and November.
In the last minute that we have here, Eric, I want to know, what is your direct message to Clerk Winfrey, Detroit's top election official, when it comes to voting accessibility?
The barriers that we're talking about are real. Like, we've documented it, we've provided it, and we want to work with the clerk's office to get them addressed. We've reached out, we've had some meetings, but we haven't seen the level of improvement we would hope. But we're here. Our goal is to work with clerks, not to go on the radio and talk about issues, but to meet with them, find solutions, and actually make voting accessible. If we're doing this work and in the next couple election cycles we aren't seeing significant improvements, like that's super concerning, because this is about compliance with the law, not just us like putting a wish list out there. This is about what the law says, and we're trying to help clerks meet their obligations under the law.
Well, it sounds like it's also about democracy. Eric Welsby is the policy director for Detroit Disability Power. The group is working to make elections fair by improving access to polling locations. They say in Detroit, many locations are still inaccessible to voters with disabilities. Eric, thank you for joining the Metro.
Thanks for having me.
The Metro contacted Clerk Winfrey's office for comment. We have yet to hear back. Coming up, are standardized tests and grades in school the best way to measure intelligence? Our next guest says no and offers an alternative way to think about it. That's next on the Metro. This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. Stay with us.